After the age of 50, many people notice something unsettling. Pain does not simply hurt more, it feels louder. It demands attention in a way it never did before. A small ache can dominate the mind, a familiar stiffness can feel emotionally heavy. And this often leads people to believe that something is wrong with their body, that aging itself is a kind of failure. But what if the volume of pain is not coming from damaged tissue alone? What if pain is not shouting because the body is weaker, but because the mind is listening differently now? As we grow older, the nervous system becomes more vigilant. It has lived through injuries, stress, loss, and survival. It has learned patterns, and like a protective guardian, it starts speaking sooner and more forcefully. Pain, in this sense, is not an enemy, it is a message shaped by memory, emotion, and meaning. When we understand this, pain stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like information. Tonight, I want to gently explore why pain feels louder after 50, not through fear, but through understanding, not by fighting the body, but by listening to it. Because when pain is met with curiosity instead of resistance, something remarkable begins to happen inside the human system. As the body ages, the nervous system does not simply wear down, it becomes more alert, more watchful, more invested in keeping you safe. Over decades of living, the brain collects experiences of strain, injury, illness, emotional shock, and recovery, and it uses this archive to predict the future. After 50, that predictive system often becomes conservative. It would rather warn too early than late. Pain, then, is no longer just a response to tissue damage, but a signal shaped by anticipation. The brain begins to amplify sensations because it has learned that ignoring early warnings once came at a cost. This is why pain can feel sudden, intense, or disproportionate to what imaging or tests reveal. The system is not broken, it is overprotective. The nervous system works on probability, not precision. If certain movements, postures, or stresses were associated with harm in the past, the brain raises the volume of pain to discourage repetition. This happens even when the original injury has healed. Muscles may be strong, joints may be stable, yet the alarm remains loud because the brain remembers vulnerability. Aging adds another layer to this process. With time, the body becomes more valuable to the system, not less. The brain knows recovery takes longer, resilience feels different, and so it guards more fiercely. Pain increases not because the body is failing, but because the brain is prioritizing preservation. There is also a biological shift in how signals are processed. The pathways that regulate inhibition of pain signals can become less efficient under chronic stress, poor sleep, inflammation, or emotional load, all of which tend to accumulate with age. When inhibition weakens, amplification dominates. The sensation itself may be small, but the experience becomes overwhelming. Understanding this changes the entire conversation around pain. Instead of asking what is damaged, a more useful question becomes, what is the nervous system trying to prevent? When pain is viewed as protection rather than punishment, the body begins to feel less like an enemy and more like a cautious ally that has learned to speak loudly to keep you alive. After 50, emotional pain often feels heavier because it rarely arrives alone. The mind no longer experiences events in isolation. Each moment is filtered through decades of stored meaning, memory, and emotional learning. When something painful happens now, it activates a network rather than a single point. A comment, a loss, or a disappointment can awaken earlier experiences that carried similar emotional tones. The brain does not label these as past and present, it reads them as patterns repeating. What feels like one hurt is actually many layers responding at once, creating depth and intensity that did not exist earlier in life. With age, memory systems become exceptionally skilled at pattern recognition, especially patterns related to threat, rejection, and loss. This skill once helped with survival, but emotionally it can magnify suffering. A present challenge may unconsciously connect to moments of failure at 30, responsibility at 40, or grief that was never fully processed. The emotional system reacts not just to what is happening, but to what it resembles. This is why pain can feel disproportionate. It is not exaggerated, it is accumulative. The mind is responding to a lifetime of context compressed into a single moment. Reflection also plays a role. Younger minds move quickly from one experience to the next. Older minds pause, they interpret, they ask, what does this mean? Meaning intensifies emotion. When pain is interpreted as symbolic of one's worth, future, or life story, it becomes heavier. The nervous system responds strongly to meaning because meaning signals importance. After 50, fewer experiences feel trivial. The brain treats emotional events as significant data points rather than passing noise, which deepens their impact. There is also less internal distraction. Earlier in life, external demands often override emotional processing. Later, as life slows in certain areas, the inner world becomes louder. Feelings that were once postponed now ask to be felt. Emotional pain increases not because it is new, but because there is finally space for it to surface. The mind is not creating suffering, it is allowing awareness. When pain is understood as layered memory and accumulated meaning rather than personal weakness, it becomes possible to meet it with curiosity instead of resistance, and that shift alone can soften the intensity of what is being felt. After 50, emotional pain is also shaped by a quiet but powerful shift in how the brain relates to time. Earlier in life, the nervous system operates with an assumption of abundance. There is time to recover, time to repair, time to try again. This perception creates emotional elasticity. Painful experiences are buffered by the belief that the future can absorb them. As the years pass, this internal sense of time subtly changes. Even without conscious awareness, the mind begins to experience time as more limited. This does not create fear by itself, but it does increase emotional weight. When something hurts, the mind instinctively measures it against what feels like a shorter horizon, and that measurement intensifies the experience. Psychologically, pain becomes louder when the mind believes the stakes are higher. After 50, many experiences feel more final. A broken connection may feel harder to replace. A missed opportunity may feel less reversible. These perceptions activate deeper emotional systems designed to protect what matters most. The brain responds with urgency, not because the situation is objectively worse, but because the internal clock has shifted. Emotional pain signals loss of time as much as loss of comfort, and time-based loss carries unique psychological gravity. This shift also affects identity. Earlier in life, identity is flexible and expanding. People are becoming something. Later in life, identity is integrated and consolidated. Roles, values, and self-concept have settled into place. When emotional pain arises, it often feels like a threat to this integrated identity rather than a temporary disruption. A criticism may feel like a challenge to character. A failure may feel like a statement about one's life rather than a single moment. The mind responds strongly because it is protecting coherence, not just emotion. Neurologically, this is reinforced by changes in emotional regulation. Stress responses take longer to settle. Emotional arousal lingers. The body remains activated even after the event has passed, giving pain more time to echo internally. What once dissolved quickly now stays present long enough to be interpreted, analyzed, and felt deeply. The experience becomes heavier not because the person is weaker, but because the system is operating with greater depth and sensitivity, responding to pain as something meaningful that deserves attention rather than something to be quickly dismissed. After 50, emotional pain is often intensified by the accumulation of unresolved inner material that the mind has carried quietly for years. Earlier in life, many people survive by postponing emotional processing. Responsibilities demand attention. Careers, families, and external pressures leave little space to sit with grief, disappointment, or unmet needs. The mind adapts by compartmentalizing pain, storing it in psychological structures that allow functioning to continue. These adaptations are not signs of avoidance, they are signs of intelligence. They allow a person to keep moving forward when stopping would be overwhelming. As life progresses, external demands often soften. There is more psychological space, more silence, and more opportunity for inward awareness. When this happens, the mind no longer needs to keep old material contained in the same way. Emotions that were once postponed begin to surface, not because something has gone wrong, but because the system senses readiness. Pain that appears later in life often belongs partly to the present and partly to the past. A current loss may awaken grief that was never fully felt years earlier. A present conflict may activate anger that was once suppressed for the sake of stability. The emotional intensity comes from multiple layers being experienced at once. From a psychological perspective, the mind is made up of parts that each carry specific roles and memories. Over decades, protective parts become highly efficient. They learned how to minimize risk, avoid vulnerability, and maintain control. After 50, when emotional pain arises, these parts activate quickly. Their intention is not to cause suffering, but to prevent re-injury. They respond with urgency, caution, and sometimes harsh internal dialogue. The pain feels stronger because it is accompanied by these protective responses, which amplify emotional signals in an effort to maintain safety. There is also a shift in tolerance for emotional truth. With maturity comes a reduced ability to deny internal experience. The mind becomes less willing to ignore what it feels. Emotional pain is no longer easily distracted away. It asks to be acknowledged. This is not a loss of resilience, it is a movement toward integration. The system is inviting awareness, asking for compassion rather than suppression, and signaling that what was once postponed is now ready to be understood, felt, and gently released. After 50, one of the most significant shifts that influences how pain is experienced is the relationship a person has with their own inner world. Over time, many people develop an expectation that maturity should eliminate emotional struggle. When pain arises later in life, it is often met with confusion or self-judgment rather than curiosity. This internal resistance adds a secondary layer of suffering. The nervous system interprets resistance as threat, which intensifies emotional signals and prolongs distress. Pain feels louder not only because it is present, but because it is being pushed against rather than understood. Psychologically, the mind responds differently when pain is met with compassion instead of control. Self-compassion signals safety to the nervous system. When the brain perceives safety, stress hormones decrease, emotional regulation improves, and internal systems soften their protective stance. After 50, the nervous system benefits greatly from this shift because it has become more sensitive and less flexible under prolonged stress. Gentle attention rather than forceful correction allows emotional intensity to settle more naturally. Pain begins to move rather than stagnate. There is also a deeper existential layer that emerges later in life. With age, experiences are no longer evaluated only by how they feel, but by what they mean. Emotional pain often reflects questions about purpose, belonging, contribution, and legacy. When these questions are ignored, pain intensifies because it is carrying unspoken significance. When they are acknowledged, pain becomes informative rather than overwhelming. The mind is not asking for answers as much as it is asking to be listened to. From a psychological integration perspective, emotional pain after 50 often signals readiness for wholeness. The mind is no longer focused solely on survival or achievement. It is prepared to reconcile past experiences, fragmented parts of the self, and release long-held burdens. This process can feel uncomfortable because it involves vulnerability, but it is also deeply restorative. Pain arises as a guide, directing attention towards areas that are ready for healing. When emotional pain is approached with curiosity, patience, and compassion, its intensity begins to shift. It no longer needs to shout to be heard. The mind relaxes its protective urgency. What once felt like evidence of decline reveals itself as a sign of psychological maturity, indicating a system that is capable of deeper awareness, integration, and self-leadership, allowing pain to transform from an enemy into a messenger that supports growth rather than fear.